The first vasectomy was performed in 1897, and since then, every innovation in birth control has been created for women to use. While female-focused birth control encouraged women to be more independent and achieve more at work, it actually placed the onus on women to be in charge of family planning. Luckily, clinical trials have started to put equal weight on this issue, creating long-lasting solutions that some are calling the male IUD.
You're listening to Found, the TechCrunch podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. And today we're talking to Kevin Eisenfrats, the co-founder and CEO of Contraline, which is developing a long-lasting reversible solution for male birth control. I'm Becca Skutak, and here to talk about how men can become a bigger part of the birth control conversation is my amazing co-host,
Dominic Midori-Davis. And of course, before we get into our conversation with Kevin, we have our two truths and a lie, so listen carefully to see which one of these statements is not true. Is it that Kevin got the idea for this company while watching 16 and Pregnant? Or that over 1,500 men were interested in the first clinical trial? Or is it that harsher abortion laws in the U.S. have lowered interest in getting birth control?
Listeners, you will have to keep listening to figure out which one of those three statements is true and which one of those is the lie. But before we hop into our conversation with Kevin, just a quick housekeeping note. We would love if you could rate and review the show on any of the platforms that you currently listen to Found on. That gives us very helpful feedback, and we would greatly appreciate it. But without further ado, here's our conversation with Kevin. Hey, Kevin, how's it going?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming on the show. I'm super excited about this conversation because your company fits into a broader political conversation we're having, a broader conversation about health, and it just feels very timely to have you on the show in today's climate. So I think we should just dive right in. I won't bother by asking you about the weather like I do for every guest and shouldn't. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about Contraline?
Contraline is a biotech company. We're working on male birth control. Our lead product is called Atom, and Atom is a hydrogel that is implanted into the vas deferens to block sperm. Our goal with Atom is to create the first long-lasting, non-hormonal, and easily reversible male contraceptive. Think what the IUD is for women. There is nothing like that for men, and that's the area we're playing in.
So walk me through the whole journey, how you got interested in this space, and sort of why did you decided to spend the last, looks like almost 10 years working on this?
It's actually been even longer than 10 years for me personally, believe it or not. So I'll kind of take you back a little bit from day one. So I'm originally from New Jersey, and I went to a medical high school, and I kind of always wanted to become a doctor. Specifically, I was thinking about OBGYN and women's health. And it was during my time in high school that I started really thinking about the concept of using biomedical engineering or innovation and applying that towards reproductive health. Like, I just felt like reproductive health kind of has stagnated and there's not a lot of innovation going on in it. So this is Kevin, I don't know, probably 15, 16 years old, thinking about these big problems. And then one day I came home, I was watching MTV, and there's a show, if you guys remember, 16 and Pregnant back in the day. And I just remember this conversation that this guy had with his girlfriend where he's like, they had an unintended pregnancy, 16 years old. And he's like, oh, my condom broke, or I forgot to use a condom that one time. And it just like dawned on me. It was like, if there was something better than condoms for men, I think that we would actually be able to reduce the number of unintended pregnancies. And why is there no male birth control? And so I started thinking about this problem, and I actually wrote my essay to get into the University of Virginia on why there's no male birth control out there. I've been thinking about this for a while. And when I got to UVA, I was doing a lot of research in reproductive health. Fast forward 4 years, I'm still on the path to med school. Entrepreneurship was not my original plan. And then I had a friend that was like, hey, you should think about coming up with an idea for a company for this competition. And the first thing that came back to me after those 4 years was, why is there no male birth control? And so I came up with the original idea for Contraline that I'm still working on about 9 years later. So Contraline, we brought this really from just me being fascinated with this big global problem to actually, we currently have one of the only male contraceptives in the world that's in clinical trials today.
And I just got to point out that you're definitely the first founder we've had on the show who was inspired by an MTV show to launch their company. So I definitely am obsessed with that. But I am curious because you have done so much research into this space. I know there's been other companies that kind of attempted to do this, but not many. Like, why has this been like a forgotten piece of the reproductive health conversation?
Yeah, I think that there's two aspects to it. There's sort of the scientific aspect to it, and then there's the social aspect to it. So I'll start with the science. Believe it or not, people actually have been working on male contraceptives since the female contraceptive pill came out in 1960. So it's not like this is a forgotten area of research. It's just that the science is really, really difficult. With female birth control, there is one egg once a month that needs to get stopped. With male birth control, we're talking about hundreds of millions of sperm that are produced every heartbeat. So getting a drug that is safely going to, immobilize or kill those sperm or block the sperm effectively is really, really difficult. And so we've been working on this for decades, we as a society have been working on this for decades, but the science has never really gotten far enough along where we actually have a safe and effective product. Then there's also the social aspect of it, which is that yes, big pharma has been working on male birth control, but they also never saw it as a big enough market opportunity versus female birth control. And there's actually been a huge movement and shift in the tides, I would say, in the past less than 10 years, where you have women that are saying, hey, I don't really want to be using hormonal birth control as much as I have been for the past 20, 30 years. And you have more men that are saying, I do want to have control over my fertility. That wasn't always the case. And so now I think that there's more interest in this area of research than there was in the 1980s or 90s or even the 2000s.
And so I guess in building this product, because you said the science hadn't yet caught up with how to, I guess, do it. So as you've done scientific research, what did you discover that has now allowed you to be able to create this product?
That's a phenomenal question. So let's talk specifically about Contraline's research and our product called Atom. What we're doing in very simple terms is we're putting a gel or a biomaterial into the vas deferens, which are a pair of tubes that transport sperm. During a vasectomy, the vas deferens are literally cut in half. And we're just doing the same thing, but inserting a tiny little gel inside. So I never had this light bulb moment of what happens when you put a gel in the vas deferens. Actually, the first time that was ever proposed was 1979 in India. And so I knew about this. But everyone that's tried to do what we call vas occlusive contraception has failed. They've put stuff in the vas deferens that has been either toxic, like polyurethane. They did that in China and it caused cancer. So they're like, okay, we can't do that anymore. Or in India, they've been injecting this material into the vas deferens that seems to be probably permanent, not really reversible. People have tried putting rubber in the vas deferens and that wasn't very effective. So you can see people have tried to do this. My big idea for Contraline was I was learning about these really cool materials called hydrogels. Hydrogels are basically these water-soluble polymers that are very biocompatible. What that means is the body tolerates them really well, and no one's ever thought about putting a hydrogel in the vas deferens before, even though there's 15 to 20 different hydrogels that are FDA approved today for other applications. So I basically had this idea of taking this class of materials that we know, we love, is very safe and effective in the body, and applying it towards the vas deferens. Easier said than done, but that's the high-level concept. And this gel that we created can last for years, but still be reversed. And that is the sort of crux of what makes us special.
And when you say reversed, can you just remove the gel? When someone decides they want it removed?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So really we are I know some people don't love when I compare this to the IUD for men, but the concept is you want a device that you can implant pretty quickly. It will be very, very effective when it's implanted. You don't have to think about it as a patient until you want to get it removed. And then you get it removed in another procedure that is minimally invasive, quick, and then restores the patient's fertility after they get the product removed. I think some of the differences between us and an IUD is one, men don't have uteruses. So, the vas deferens is different than the uterus. So our procedure, let me just tell you a little bit about it. It's done in office setting, mostly by urologists, because urologists are actually the most skilled at doing vasectomy or vasectomy-like procedures. And it takes about 10, 15 minutes and it's under local anesthesia. So it's actually virtually painless. The guy is awake, can do this under local anesthesia, and then they walk out with a gel and it starts working pretty soon after, we've seen within a couple of weeks, the gel's already basically 100% effective.
And I'm definitely curious, with the research you guys have done, what has it been like taking that research, getting these different findings, and then actually turning it into what became Atom and starting the trials and things like that? Because I know we've had some biotech founders on before, and it's always interesting to hear about how much science just like dies in the lab, even though there are commercial use cases for it, because obviously that is such a difficult process. So what has it been like coming to these discoveries on the science and then kind of taking it to where you guys have gotten today?
Yeah, from a really high level, I mean, this stuff we call deep tech and biotech is kind of a subset of that. It just takes a while, right? So from 2015, when I started the company, to around 2018 was us developing just the polymer formulation alone, like really just chemistry, material characterization, optimization. From 2018 on, it was a lot of preclinical studies, so animal trials. We tested this on a variety of different animal models, toxicity testing, and then we had to figure out how to manufacture this, what's called GMP manufacturing, which is for human use. That's where biotech differs. In the hardware, you can just be like, okay, we have a prototype now, let's figure out how to manufacture. For biotech, you're like, not only do we have to manufacture this, but it's got to pass all this rigorous testing that the FDA, employs, what we call GMP. And then we found out, okay, we have this cool gel, it works in animals, but then we don't have really a consistent way of getting it into the vas deferens. So we actually had to develop the first ever hydrogel delivery device. It's like this sort of gun-looking device that urologists can use. It loads the syringes, they press a button, and it automates the delivery of the gel into the body the same way every time. We had to develop that from scratch. So only after doing all of that and 40 patents later, about $20 million raised, then could we start clinical trials. And of course, all of those things had to go well too. So it was a long journey, about probably 6-7 years before we, from an idea to starting a clinical trial.
No, that is interesting to think that you guys had to come up with the own application as well, whereas so many cases in biotech, there's like, oh, well, this treatment for this used this type of application, so we're going to model it after that. But with this being something so different, you do have to come up with your own medical device too.
Yes. And on top of that, no one's done this before. This is a first-in-class product. So if you're developing a stent or like a hip replacement, I can go look at so many devices that have how they developed it and how they work. Here, we have to learn about the anatomy and physiology and develop all the models while we're also developing the product. So that's also really unique.
And so you're still in trials right now, right?
We just finished our first in human trial. So this is, some people call it a phase 1, we call it a first in human, but we actually implanted 25 patients in Australia with Atom, and we just finished that like 2 months ago.
Oh, that's exciting. What happens next?
Next, we are actually gearing up to start our US trial, the big registration trial to get to FDA approval. That's what we're gearing up for today.
Is there any reason why you chose Australia to start, or is that just...
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. So with medical devices, you could do your trials a lot of different places, as long as they're done well with under the right guidance. And then you want to make sure that the data we generate, our FDA in the US is going to accept that data. Australia is actually a hotbed of innovation, especially in reproductive health, urology. So the doctors were the right fit. We've also found for Contraline specifically that the number one thing that tells us if men are going to be interested in Atom is what the rate of vasectomies in that country are. Now, even though Atom is not trying to compete with or take over the vasectomy market, it's sort of similar. It's part of the same equation. If men are more likely to get a vasectomy when they're done having kids, they're more likely to get Atom before they're done having kids. And so Australia actually has one of the highest rates of vasectomy in the world. There's just not as much of a stigma there for this procedure. So that was another reason why we chose to go there. It was easy to recruit patients. And let me just tell you a data point. So I mentioned we have 25 patients for this clinical trial. We started recruiting using social media for this trial. I mean, Facebook, Instagram, Google. We had 1,500 men want to be in this clinical trial. That just tells you how many people are interested in this, and men are willing to step up and get a procedure so that they can take over responsibility for birth control.
That's so interesting. I mean, it makes sense to start your first trial somewhere where it definitely seems like people will be more likely to want to participate. How do you think that kind of information or that kind of demand for that first trial translates to what you're seeing what you would see in the US per se? Because I know what you mentioned a little earlier, that it definitely seems like in general, men are more interested in finding this type of solution, which definitely socially, anecdotally feels correct. But how do you think about that transferal of demand as you plan like future trials that you guys need to do for the FDA approval?
Yeah, well, I think Australia, another reason we chose it, I think it is a huge parallel to the United States. The markets and the demand are very similar. In the United States, there's about 500,000 vasectomies per year in the US. After Roe v. Wade was overturned, we've seen about a 30% increase in the interest in vasectomy. So men are even more interested now than they were before. But what's interesting is with Contraline, we're going after a younger population. We're going after men who have not even had any kids. So we estimate that in the United States alone, there's somewhere between 13 and 14 million men who would get Adam. And so it's a humongous market, somewhere between a 10 and $11 billion opportunity in the United States alone. I think Australia was a great proof of concept point, and I think it will translate very, very well to countries like US.
What has it been like fundraising for this product and talking to investors about it? Because investors are always like hit or miss in terms of what they get and what they like. And so I would love to hear kind of your fundraising journey on this.
I think it's pretty unique, to be honest with you, because from face value, Contraline looks like a medical device company. And there are medical device investors out there. There are not as many med tech investors as like deep tech or biotech. But what's interesting is Contraline has been able to gather interest from a wide variety of investors. So some of our bigger investors are Google Ventures, Founders Fund, MBX Capital. We've got two women's health funds, Amboy Street Ventures and RH Capital. And then we have some life science investors like Shangbei Capital, Myelin, and folks like that. So what you can see is we, I think, appeal to investors with long time horizons that are really here for the big vision of changing society and how we think about reproduction. We've got this grandiose mission. This is bigger than any single product. I mean, if you think about what the pill did for women and when it came out in 1960 and how much it gave women better rights, it impacted education, society, their ability to go up the ladder in the workforce. I mean, everything, control when couples can have children. Like that's what Adam, I think, could potentially do in the future as we move forward in this, especially with this political climate. So I think we attract a certain type of investor that really is here for the long run and seeing how far Contraline can go and impact the world. And that's why we attract the Google Ventures and Founders Fund of the world.
And you just mentioned it a couple times, and I definitely wanted to ask you about it. But building this product in the current political climate must be very interesting. I know you mentioned people are getting more vasectomies post Roe v. Wade, and people are definitely focusing on reproductive health, what we're seeing with abortion and abortion restrictions and things. People are worried some states will come for birth control after that. What has it been like building this product? Of course, there's always thoughts and opinions about reproductive health and the access and things like that prior to what happened with Roe v. Wade a couple of years ago. But things are very hypercharged now. Things are very different. How has that affected you guys, if at all? And how do you think about building this kind of a solution when there are so many thoughts and opinions about the space that there weren't when you got started?
I think as a whole, what's happening politically is, I would say, net positive to Contraline and companies like us, because what people are realizing is like, okay, there are people trying to create restrictions on women's health right now in different ways. So, okay, what can we do about it? Well, I think there are great people out there who are lobbyists and that's what they do well. And I think that I'm an innovator. And so when I think about what is the impact that I can have, well, I think that if we create products that take some of the burden off of women and put it on men, that could help with this whole equation. That could help with this whole problem that's going on. So we're seeing that impact in a couple different ways. One, we see a lot more men reaching out to us saying, hey, I want to be in clinical trials when you bring this to the US. We have a waiting list right now of like 9,000 men in the United States alone who are ready to get this. That, by the way, increased dramatically after Roe v. Wade was overturned. We have investors reaching out to us and saying, I want to put my money behind things that are going to help women. And this will do that. Like Contraline is a women's health company. And so we see interest from that perspective. And then for me personally, I just wanted to move faster. I mean, I've always been someone that's trying to, move as quickly as I can, but like the time is now for us, right? Like, and I want to get this out to the world and I want to help people ASAP. This has just been very motivating for me and my team.
Have you already run into some backlash from certain groups of people?
Not as much as you think. No, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think really a majority of people I speak to, I think, are pro the idea of male contraception existing. And that is a good thing. I don't face a lot of backlash.
So all the backlash always is about women, I fear. We already knew that, but good to get that confirmed. And I definitely wanted to ask you, I'm curious, what is it like? Obviously, you started running this company pretty soon after you got out of school, and this is obviously a big problem to tackle. You originally grew up wanting to be a doctor. So what has it been like pursuing this entrepreneurial career and founding your own company when it was a different path than you were originally expecting?
It's the best decision I've ever made. I get to wake up every day and think about how am I going to create devices, new procedures, and drugs, because I'm involved in a couple of really interesting pharmaceutical projects for doctors and patients one day. So I think I would have been very happy as a doctor, but the impact I could potentially have and Contraline can have on society might be even greater than any one doctor could have. And I'm not putting doctors or surgeons down. It's just I feel like the best impact I can have is by creating new inventions in medicine. And so I don't regret my decision a single day. I get to work with doctors every single day. So I still am extremely close to medicine. When we were finishing our trial in Australia, I was there watching our procedures happen, thinking about ways we can even improve it. So I'm constantly around it. It's just my brain is operating in a slightly different way than if I was the one doing the procedure.
As you've been growing the company and working and being on this journey, have there been any unexpected challenges of being a founder? Like, everyone knows being a founder is hard, but has there been a situation where you were like, oh, I was not expecting that to happen? What have some of the challenges been?
I think that doing something technically hard is just going to take a lot of time and a lot of technical challenges along the way. And you just have to expect it. Be like, okay, there are things that we've pursued for a year where it ended up being like, oh, we shouldn't have done that, or like we shouldn't have put so much time into that. And it's like, looking back, it feels like a little bit of a waste of time, but it's okay. Like, you learn so much from those sort of quote unquote failures. I think fundraising is always going to be a challenge because we don't really fit a box. Like, I always will have to go and find new investors every time we hit an inflection point that are willing to get behind this mission. That's always going to be challenging. I was the first person to ever pitch venture capitalists on new male contraceptives when I started the company in 2015. Before that, it was all nonprofits and like academic researchers. So I'm having to educate the market a lot. There's going to be potentially regulatory hurdles. This is the first time the FDA is going to approve a new male contraceptive. We don't know what we don't know. So the lesson with being a founder is this is a marathon, definitely not a sprint, and have backup plans and be ready for like the unknowns that are going to come across in the future.
And I wanted to ask you one question about the FDA approval process, because I know sort of like we're talking about a lot of things that you guys are working on. These are just hard. Like, getting FDA approved is just a hard process kind of no matter what. But since you guys are working in this category that people have been trying to crack the code in for so long and haven't been able to, what does that process look like for you guys? What will it be like to actually eventually go for that FDA approval?
So specifically for Adam, this is because it's a medical device. There's a documented path for implantable medical devices. A lot of it's similar if you're developing a gel for male contraception versus developing a hip implant, like the amount of testing you have to do is very similar. So one big thing is like you have to do all this biocompatibility, toxicity testing, animal studies, and specifically the most important thing is clinical trials. So we're going to have to put this device into hundreds of patients, and we're going to have to look at things like safety and efficacy. Safety is going to be like pain, infection, and long-term safety, short-term safety. And then efficacy is like, does it work? Does this thing block sperm? Potentially, we might have to do a pregnancy study. Is this thing able to prevent pregnancy, just like you would expect with the contraceptive? So this is not easy stuff. The average implantable medical device costs somewhere between $75 and $90 million to get to the finish line, from beginning to the finish line. So it's a pretty expensive path, but that's what is ahead of us. And then when this gets FDA approved, you hope that this thing will impact the lives of millions and millions of people out there.
And what does the timeline look like for that whole process? And I know, of course, it's always going to vary based on a ton of factors, based on your company as well as factors outside of your company too.
Yeah.
But Just to get an idea, because we, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have a ton of biotech founders on. So maybe our listeners aren't super familiar with like what this kind of timeline looks like.
Well, we believe that we are somewhere around 3 to 4 years away from FDA approval. So that's 2027, 28 is our sort of really kind of realistic prediction of when this thing will be on the market.
Oh, wow. Okay. More from this conversation right after a quick break.
I wanted to switch gears just a little bit to talk about you as, I guess, a founder, a leader, and talk a bit about your team. And so how big is your team right now that you're working with?
Currently, we have 17 employees full-time. We've got a beautiful headquarters in Charlottesville, Virginia, our own lab that we built here. And then we also work with a lot of different partners for anything from manufacturing to preclinical trials and clinical trials and consultants and things like that. But 17 full-time employees.
And when you were building out this company, what is your first hire? Is it a doctor or is it some other job?
First hire was a biomedical engineer followed by a polymer scientist. So like a chemist, basically, like PhD level chemist.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. That's so cool. Oh, my gosh. How would you describe yourself as a leader in terms of managing all of these different types of people and working on this product? How would you describe yourself as a leader?
I personally think I'm extremely ambitious and sort of like, the book that talks about, I think it's like Ben Horowitz's book of like a wartime versus peacetime CEO or something like that. I actually have really worked to figure out how to be both, and it depends on what occasion I need to like pull from. So there are times where I'm like getting the team to really hustle and go as quickly as possible, and I'm a little bit in wartime mode. And then there's times where I'm like really, really good at just taking a step back, focusing on like what I can be best at, which is usually like fundraising, strategic input, and things like that, and let the team do what they're best at. So also, I wouldn't say I'm consensus driven a little bit, but like I love that our company does still have the sense of flat organization. So we have an executive team, there's 4 of us. I can't remember the last time we went forward with something that not all of us agreed on. Not saying there has to be consensus. There are times where I'll be like, hey, we like at the end of the day, let's just pick a path and move forward. But I really like hearing everyone's opinions and really debating them. And I love when people challenge me. I never want to think I'm the smartest person in the room. And then I love just having diversity of thought, diversity of people, diversity of just ideas coming to the table so we can find the best path forward. I try to hire people that I really want to be friends with and collaborate with. Not saying I have to be friends outside of work, but I want to enjoy working with people while I'm there.
Wait, are you allowed to reveal what the last thing you and all the executives had a massive disagreement about?
No, I literally can't think of the last big thing we had a disagreement about. I'm sorry, I can't. I would if I could think of it. I guess I chose pretty good executives that we all have like, we think through all the options, but it's very rare for us to have a major disagreement.
What is it like hiring for this company? Because as you mentioned with like the first employees, there's of course a lot of aspects to it. There's the actual male contraceptive part. There's the medical device part. Of course, there's all the business operations. As you mentioned, you guys had to do like marketing to get people involved in trials. That's obviously a big piece of these kinds of companies and innovation. What is it, especially with you guys only being 17 full-time people when you've been around for almost 10 years, which, I mean, you've watched startup hiring. We don't need to tell you that people kind of went a little crazy over the last few years and why companies needed thousands of employees to do things that definitely didn't need that many people. How has it been like being really intentional about who to hire and kind of like when to actually add to the team?
I love that question. It's something that it's been my viewpoint from day one. I never wanted to overhire ever. Like before, I just saw the writing on the wall. It was like, I just think people are happier, like high performers. And I'm talking about for like a deep tech company. High performers are happier when they've got interesting stuff to work on. How do you give them interesting stuff to work on? Don't put them in a little silo and give them one specific project. So that's how we are able to hire people that normally would want to go work for big pharma, like, or big biotech companies. Because if they went to go work for big pharma, big biotech, they'd be doing the same experiment for like 2 years, some boring experiment. And I'm like, hey, come here. In your first week at Contraline, you'll learn how to do 10 brand new experiments. And then the next week you might develop 5 more, and it's like, so we hire amazing people that are hungry and ambitious, and then we give them responsibilities that they probably would never get at bigger companies, and it allows them to grow faster. And I'm really, really proud of this. I've been working on this, like I said, we talked about almost 9 years now. I have employees who have been with me now 6 years, I think almost 7 years. So that's not also very typical for a startup. And I think that says a lot about our culture and how we can see when people are ready to grow, take that next step, learn some new skills. We invest in our people. And I think that's the beauty here. So on average, we only grow by like 2 employees a year, maybe. It's not a lot, but because of that, everyone always has a lot to do.
Thinking about where you guys are now, you sort of have the timeline in mind for potential FDA approval. Thinking back to the fact that you originally got this idea when you were in high school, how do you feel personally about the progress you guys have been able to make and the fact that you were able to take that idea you had so long ago and kind of put it into practice?
I feel proud. I genuinely do. I mean, I it's not something I think about every day that I'm like, I don't think we need to constantly be patting ourselves on the back. I think we need to be looking forward and being like, what else can we do? How else can we improve this? How fast can we move? But yeah, there are times like when I'm doing this interview and I'm getting asked these questions that I'm like, yeah, we have come a long way and we have made strides in a field that not many people have been able to. So I do feel proud in that way.
I know that it's all still kind of early because we have to get to the US first, but have you started planning a European expansion?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Europe, Australia, and US are kind of our three biggest markets in terms of launching. And the question is really, who are the best partners for us in sort of those markets? I don't think Contraline can do it all. We may have to figure out like what is the commercial strategy in each of those places. Do we partner with another company that already has a large footprint in commercializing contraceptives or urology products in UK and Germany and France and Spain and things like that? Or, how are we thinking about this? So the next few years are going to be really interesting as we develop our go-to-market strategy.
Is it easier or harder to get a medical device product approved in Europe versus the US?
It used to be, from what I hear, it used to be easier. These days, for what we're doing, like an implantable device, it's actually on par with the US in terms of difficulty. So it has increased in difficulty.
And a similar follow-up question that I had is, you guys are working on Atom, product number 1, but reproductive health and things that fall under that umbrella, it's a huge category. Are there other products in the future? Do you anticipate launching other things? Are there areas you're interested in that you think would kind of fit under that Contraline umbrella? How do you think about expansion once you guys do kind of eventually get that FDA approval for what you're working on now?
We see Contraline like, I know we've been talking about male contraception here this whole time, but we really see Contraline as a hydrogel company. Like that is what we're really good at. We're really good at creating these innovative new biomaterials. And that's where our IP is as well. So when you think about it, you're like, okay, what else can you do with hydrogels? Like where else can you apply these cool materials to? And there's really two paths of research for us that we're actually already working on. The first one is actually more Atom related. So we see Atom as a platform. And the platform is really, if you think about IUDs, the first IUD that ever came out, I think lasted either 3 or 5 years. And now there's like a 7-year one and the copper one's 12 years. So with Atom, it's like, can we create different formulations or different versions of Atom that can last for different periods of time? And that's the interesting thing for us is like, maybe there's a product that's 1 to 2 years and then the next one's 3 to 5 years. And maybe we do another one that's longer or permanent as like an alternative to vasectomy. But we're continuing to make a lot of innovations on that product line. And then separately is like, okay, what other applications to your question can you use the gel for? And that's really where we're going to a lot of potential strategics and saying, hey, we've got this interesting technology, but we are thinking about using this for things like non-hormonal female contraception or other reproductive health issues that are unsolved and I can't really talk about right now. So that's kind of where we're going after. I will say our theme is like, we do not want to develop one-off products, like go after industries that already have great solutions in. We want to go after these big unsolved reproductive health problems. And we're willing to take that risk that others are not willing to take.
Well, cool. Well, that puts us right at time. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Kevin. This has been really interesting.
Thank you for having me.
And that was our conversation with Kevin. Before we dive into the outro, Dom, what was the lie?
The lie was that harsher abortion laws have, I guess, lowered the interest in getting birth control. The truth is that it's actually increased the want for birth control, and Contraline apparently has a wish list, or what? Not like a wish list. What is it called?
Like a wait list.
A wait list. 9,000 men apparently have signed up for clinical trials, and they've seen an uptick in investor interest.
No, this is one of the things that stood out to me throughout this conversation was just how much interest for this there was. Because on the one hand, I'm not super surprised, especially unplanned pregnancies. Of course, they do have an impact on men as well, and men would have an interest in preventing those and the financial and then other type of implications that come with unplanned pregnancy. But at the same time, men don't talk about this stuff, like ever. So it's like, my friends don't talk about this. I don't hear people talking about this. I don't read about this. I don't see it on TV. So it's like interesting to see how much support and interest they have gotten across the board.
Yeah, because I definitely think more men would be on birth control if they had the option. People make it seem like it's like a woman thing, or like we don't want to get pregnant, or we don't want to do this. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure if both people had control over whether or not to bring a baby into the world, there would be more effort on both parts. Like, it's not like we're not trying to kill families here. Like, everybody wants to have more control over family planning. And so I think this is really cool.
And I also thought it was super interesting because I know going into it, I think we both were curious, like, why did Contraline do its first clinical trial in Australia? And so it was really interesting that Kevin was saying that how they came to that decision of like looking at what rate people got vasectomies in different countries and how it's obviously not a perfect one-to-one comparison. But because I remember reading it, I was like, Australia, that's random. Must have something to do with like the rules. Then he was like, no, like it's like the rate of we thought people would be interested. And I was like, oh, okay.
Australia is so funny. Oh my gosh. Because what did he say? That it's not as stigmatized down there, right? Or something like that, which just goes into societal differences. And yeah, I mean, I know Australia was, no offense to Australia, but kind of a random country.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was expecting, but like Australia was not the first one I expected.
No, me neither. But it's interesting to hear that they'll have, it seems like even more potential people interested for the clinical trial when they do launch it here in the US. What did you think about the fact that they haven't had too much issue fundraising? It kind of plays back into what I said earlier, where it seems like things are going so smoothly and everyone wants this on both sides of the table. And I'm like, I don't doubt it, but it just seems a little out of left field.
I know. I wonder if he was a woman, if he would still be getting this amount of funding for this product in particular. I was just starting to think about that for no reason at all. I was just thinking about it. But yeah, I was actually shocked. 24 million is a lot of money. And it just goes to show that everyone is interested in having more control over family planning. And it was shocking. Series A, that's pretty far along. But of course, they need like $1 bajillion because they're medical people and scientists, and this stuff isn't free. So they actually need more money, I think. They need a lot of money. So actually 24 million is kind of low.
No, I know this is like biotech flavored, and I know he mentioned it's also kind of like a medical device company. But anything in this area, like the quote unquote like venture standard operating procedures is just so different. Like they just have to raise such a different amount of money, and they all go public wicked early, and they all like do these. They're just on such a different timeline that it is always interesting to like check in on that side.
Should this be a VC-backed company?
I think so. I definitely was surprised by some of the investors that they had because pre-COVID, it was always very like that hard line where like biotech investors invested in biotech and medical devices and non-biotech investors invested in everything else. They have some like traditional VCs on their cap table, which I thought was interesting, but maybe people are really just that jazzed about this idea or really have that conviction it's going to work, which I can't say I don't agree with them.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what this gel is. Because when I think of gel, like I'm literally thinking like hair gel, but it can't be that type of gel because that would dissolve, I assume.
Yeah.
What does the gel look like?
No, I know. Medical stuff interests me. And at the same time, I'm always just like, maybe that's none of my business how that works. Like, I feel like I like don't know.
Yes. Yeah, like I don't need to, as someone who like is always on WebMD, probably the less I know, the better in terms of like medical stuff. I don't need to know actually.
No, I feel like I would just have more questions the more I found out, which would mean I wouldn't end up with more answers at the end of the day.
And indeed, I have more questions.
I will say, though, it is funny, and I know we mentioned this in the actual show, but I just love that the founding story of this company involves 16 and Pregnant on MTV, a show I watched all the time as a youth, probably too young to watch it, but definitely did the job. Scared me out of anything like that. But like, I don't know. I feel like you'd get a founder and they would be like, oh, I came up with this great idea when I was in college and I was studying to become a prestigious doctor. And he was just like, yeah, I got the idea watching reality TV in high school. And I'm just like, I love the authenticity.
Reality TV has changed lives and has inspired the next generation of innovation. First of all, 16 and Pregnant stands rise. Teen Mom stands rise.
Yes.
MTV was doing the thing, single-handedly teaching us stuff. I don't know. I know. I loved, that was a really honest answer. And honestly, just makes a lot of sense also. The story makes sense in terms of he's watching 16 and Pregnant and then he gets this idea. That was a good show. If MTV stops playing ridiculousness.
23 hours a day. Yeah.
23 hours a day. Put back the hits. But other than that, I mean, I cannot wait to see where this goes, how far it goes, what happens to it, what angry politicians try to get rid of it. Because otherwise, this would be a really nice addition to the family planning medical sphere.
No, I agree. And I think this will be one to watch for sure, especially as the political landscape around this stuff continues to be confusing and depressing overall. So like we'll see how this goes. Politics and the stuff we cover interact all the time, but this one seems a little more closely aligned than a lot of the areas that I care about, I would say. So I'm definitely curious to see what happens with this company. Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.